If you're pressed for time and can't watch this whole video, here's the bottom line. If you're applying for disability benefits and you're scheduled for a disability exam, be as honest as possible, because nothing will get your disability application rejected more than indications of dishonesty. Hello, I'm John Foster, and I'm a medical doctor who does disability exams. I've done over 1,500, and today I'm going to talk about disability and dishonesty. I'm sure that will ruffle some feathers. Now, I usually see between 15 and 20 patients when I do a day of disability exams, and most of them are as honest as they can be. But there's almost always one or two patients who are trying to be deceptive, either in what they tell me or how they behave during the exam, or both. This is much more common than in a general medical clinic or emergency room, although all doctors are familiar with some deception, usually with patients who are addicted to prescription drugs who are trying to convince the doctor to write them a prescription. So what do I mean by dishonesty? I mean knowingly telling the doctor things that aren't true, or behaving during the exam in ways that are knowingly unreal. Here are some things where the patient either says or does things that aren't actually true, but are not examples of dishonesty. The first is when the patient is mistaken. I had an example of this last weekend. I had a person come in who had arthritis, and they told me they didn't have rheumatoid arthritis. However, when I examined them, it was clear that they did. What had happened is they had seen a specialist who had told them they didn't have rheumatoid arthritis. That information was wrong. The patient naturally believed the doctor, so they told me something that was wrong, but they were not being dishonest. The second is hypochondriacs. Hypochondriacs are people who are convinced, who absolutely believe that they have diseases and medical conditions that in fact they don't have. They are almost always very unhappy people, and I feel a lot of sympathy for them. There's what I call the hypochondriacal face, which is often these people will have a fixed expression on their face that combines worry and sadness. It looks as though they've never had a good day in their life. When these people describe their imaginary conditions, they're not being deceptive or lying. They actually believe what they're saying. The rarest group are people who are psychotic or confused, people who are out of touch with reality, who may have what we call delusions, which are false beliefs. And I've described one in my past videos, a young woman who believed that she couldn't breathe through her nose and was in the first episode of psychosis due to schizophrenia. Now, there are two general ways in which patients are dishonest. The first and most common is exaggeration. These are patients who actually have disabling conditions, but they exaggerate them in the exam. And that's pretty understandable. It's a long, frustrating, difficult process applying for disability, and people want to appear as disabled, as sick or injured as possible. Here's an example. I recently had a patient who was claiming disability due to eye problems. I greeted them outside the exam room. They walked in the exam room. I indicated the chair for them to sit down, and they sat without any difficulty. And then they told me they couldn't see anything. So I told them, well, you didn't walk into the wall and you saw the chair to sit down on, so you saw something. You need to be accurate. And after that, the patient was honest, and it turned out they were totally blind in one eye and had serious vision problems in the other eye. That was a really no harm, no foul situation. And it's part of my job, if I find a patient who is dishonest, to indicate that in my report. And there's a limit to the amount of exaggeration that's tolerable. If I see gross exaggeration throughout the medical history and physical exam, I'm going to put that down. The final example of dishonesty are patients who completely invent a medical condition out of thin air. They don't believe they have it, and they're not exaggerating a condition they actually have. An example of a patient I saw in the past month was a person who walked in the exam room normally, sat down normally, then after I'd taken their history, stood up from the chair, walked across the room, and sat down on the exam table normally. As part of my exam, I always check patients' strength in their arms and legs. And one of the things I check in the legs is I have the patient sit on the exam table with their feet off the ground, put my hands on top of their toes, and ask the patient to lift their feet up as hard as they can. When I did this, this patient's feet didn't move at all, not even a tiny twitch. And there is a medical condition where that can happen, and it's called foot drop. It's usually due to a paralysis of the muscles that elevate the feet due to nerve damage. However, it is absolutely impossible to walk, sit, and stand normally with complete foot drop in both feet. I pointed out to the patient that they were not trying, and they insisted they were. I asked them again to lift their feet up, not a twitch. I pointed out again that I did not think they were trying, and finally they lifted their feet up with normal strength. And of course, after that, they were angry at me for discovering their deception. What was interesting is the same month, I had a person who had cerebral palsy affecting one side of their body, and they had a true foot drop on that side of their body. They couldn't lift their foot up at all, and they were being honest and trying hard. And I was fascinated to see this patient because it was obvious that they could not walk normally, could not sit down normally. They needed to use their arms to help support them, and could not rise up from a chair normally. Again, they needed to use arms to get up, and they were a young person. They should have been able to get up normally from a chair without any difficulty. As I've mentioned in previous videos, it's extremely difficult to deceive an experienced physician who's examined tens of thousands of patients. What patients imagine people would say who are seriously injured or disabled, and what they imagine they would do in the exam are usually not what actual people who are disabled say and do. I've even detected deception in many trained medical personnel, and even they have a great deal of difficulty in feigning illness or injury. So my really heartfelt advice is, if you have serious medical problems and you're applying for disability, please be honest, because if you're dishonest, it's guaranteed that your application will be rejected. Well, I hope this has been helpful, and as always, remember, if it happens, it's possible.